Okay, so let's keep going, and what we're going to do is we're now going to talk about the first feature that can help us out with those requirements, which are profiles. Okay, profiles do a number of things, as you can see here, and we're going to get into each of those different things that they do. All right, so first of all, a profile is the mechanism by which we assign different types of licenses to different users. So a profile, one of the things that we set up in a profile is we associate one of our licenses with that profile. You can think of your licenses as being a pool. You have a pool of, let's say, 500 or whatever it may be. Any active user that is assigned a profile, that is assigned that license type, will then utilize one of your seats or one of your licenses and then have the access or the privilege levels associated with that. Now, one of the things that we do is we split up. Salesforce has kind of this, you'll notice on our website we have the red and the blue. The red indicates salesforce.com, our off-the-shelf applications, the CRM stuff. The blue indicates the force.com platform. And from a licensing standpoint, we separate those two. The platform licenses are cheaper than the Salesforce licenses in general. And the reason is because the Salesforce ones contain a lot of off-the-shelf application functionality. Okay. When it says here that there's the Salesforce and then the Salesforce platform, and then it says CRM access and platform access, for the most part what this means is that CRM access is access to things like cases, campaigns, opportunities, products, all the stuff that goes into CRM and the functionality that we've built that's behind that. We refer to that as being CRM access. Now, with a Salesforce.com license, or with one of these, with a CRM license essentially, you also get access to the platform functionality. In other words, custom objects, all the stuff that we're talking about during this week. So the Salesforce license is a superset of functional access. The platform license is a subset though, and with the platform license, you do not have access to those things like the campaigns and the opportunities, but you can create custom objects like the way we did in our recruiting application, and those users would have access to those off-the-shelf applications. I'm sorry, the custom applications that you've created, the opposite of that. That being said, people who are utilizing the platform license also have access to accounts and contacts. So even though those are part of the CRM stuff, they are considered generic enough that both platform and the CRM licenses have access to those. Now this slide is a gross simplification of how licensing affects the available functionality and what your users can do. If you want to get the definitive answer, out on our website, if you go out to salesforce.com, there are two PDFs, and so if you go out, notice here's our sort of our color scheme, which is the red is the Salesforce CRM. There is a PDF document here under additions and pricing, and then under force.com, the blue colorization, here there's a different PDF for that. And so if you download them, what you're able to do is to compare the different types of licenses and specifically what you're able to do with those different types of licenses. So like I said, it affects what your end users are able to do, so understanding this and getting the details is sort of an important thing, okay? But yeah, all right. Okay, so profiles. In addition to license type, profiles determine a lot of things. So your users, every user is going to have a profile associated with them. In their user account, just jumping back here, in the user account, what we do is, let me actually log out as this person. So here's my list of users, and notice that the last column there, profile, every user has a profile associated with them. And if I click on a specific user, like Andrew Goldberg, you'll see that Andrew Goldberg has been assigned the standard user profile. Okay? So when you assign a profile to a user, what does that determine? Well, it determines what three categories of things. One are permissions. So permissions are kind of split into two different categories. There are user permissions, and then there are administrative permissions. User permissions tend to be things associated with doing, business-oriented stuff like, can this user, for instance, run reports, or can they do something like transfer leads or something like that. So it's the user-oriented ones are very business-oriented, as opposed to the administrative ones are more like, can the user configure this? It's very setup menu-oriented in terms of what that user can do. But each of these are simply checkboxes. So it's an on-off switch. Can this user do this or not? Okay, and I'll show you those and give you some examples of what those are. So permissions are determined by profile. Okay. The second thing is access to data. So access to data does a number of things. There's two main categories within access to data. There's field level security, and then there's really kind of object level security. Now, object level security, we also refer to it as object CRUD. Now, the reason we call it CRUD is that CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. Now, it really should be called CRED these days because they changed it from update to edit. And you'll see the term edit within the tool now, but unfortunately the acronym CRUD has stuck around because it's such a fun thing to say, I guess. Whether you have the potential to create, read, and update and delete objects, certain types of objects, are determined by your profile. Okay? You can also set up something called field level security. You can create a global rule that says, users with this profile can never view this particular field. So field level security is kind of an effective way to protect your data. So it, whether the user is doing a report or they're viewing a record, field level security prevents them from either viewing that data, viewing the values associated with that particular field, or editing that particular field. Okay. User interface, the profiles also drive user interface customizations. So people with different profiles will see different or have different user interface experiences with Salesforce.com. So you can determine which page layout a user sees based on their profile. You might create multiple profiles and multiple page layouts. And you can do some assignments and say, people with this profile see this page layout. People with this other profile see this other page layout. So it allows you to perform customization in that regard. Same thing goes for tabs, different tabs that you show to people, and different applications. So what are the available applications in the drop-down list? There's also something called record types, which also drives the UI, and we'll come back to that when we get to that topic. Okay? Question?
Yeah, in the access to data, which one overrides which one? Field level and object level. Which one is the muscle?
Field level security takes precedence over object CRUD. So field level security is fairly universal in terms of if you say, a user can't do this in field level security, then even if you said that the user has the ability to update positions, if you're protecting it with field level security, the user will not be able to, for instance, edit that field. So field level security takes precedence over object CRUD. So there's a fundamental difference between field level security and this object level security. And that is that field level security, for the most part, is kind of a golden rule in the sense that with field level security, you're saying the user can't do this. They can't read or edit this specific field, okay? Now, object level access, and we'll talk about object CRUD in more detail, this is the potential to do something. So just granting someone the ability to read positions, that doesn't mean that that user can now read all positions. That means they have the potential to read a position record or view a position record, okay? But they need to get the record level access to that in order to do that, okay? So, all right. So object CRUD, or I'm sorry, tab settings and object CRUD, yeah. Tab settings, for instance, what are we talking about here? Where it's, you know, which tabs the user sees. We can do things like default on and default off, but the user can still do the opposite, go into their own settings and turn it on. Or we can just say that this is hidden, so don't ever show it to this user, okay? Object level CRUD, like I said, the potential to access something. There's also login hours and login IP ranges. So we can set up a window of time every day that the user is able to log into Salesforce, but they cannot access Salesforce from outside that window of time. And then same thing goes for IP addresses. So we can limit or restrict access based on IP address. So we might only add the IP addresses associated with, you know, your location, your office location, but not allow, for instance, access from home. We enable this at, I know in our internal app within Salesforce, we enable this. And what that means is that anytime I access the internal Salesforce org, I have to VPN into Salesforce. So it's another level of requiring a user to authenticate themselves in order to get to the Salesforce, to get to your Salesforce data. So.
What happens if you are in the CRM system using it and the hours are again moved away from the window that is allowed?
What happens when you're currently logged in and it then goes over the time? I don't know. I don't know if it's a data-oriented thing, like when you click on the save button, it checks every time, or if it's a login check in the sense that if you remain logged in. So let me test that one out. So that should be one I can test out. It might also be in the docs too. Okay.
What is the good purpose of this? Is it for server maintenance issues or something like that? Do you know that?
No, it's a security thing. You know, you're restricting when and from where users can access Salesforce.com.
It's just for security.
Yeah. I guess from an administrative standpoint, you know, I'm trying to think of what, you know, I've heard of people, you know, when they're doing like a weekend maintenance type thing, you know, this is kind of an admin thing, but I think that they've deactivated their users' accounts and then they applied the patches and then reactivated those accounts. I think that's the mechanism that they go about that, although they could have restricted access based on the login hours too. So, yeah.
Chris,
Yeah.
is it possible to warn users that the time limit is about to expire so they rush what they're doing to avoid to
I'm not sure. So some sort of, you know, I'm not sure if it just, yeah, I definitely don't know of anything in which you can push, you know, push out. I mean, it's a, you know, as a web browser-based application, there's not a mechanism to push information to users, but let me check to see if it gives a warning message. So when I run that test with the login hours, maybe it does, you know, next time the user, I don't know if it does do some sort of default message, but I'm pretty sure there's no custom message that you can send associated with this. So I'll check that out when I'm checking out the login hours. So, all right, so there are 6 standard profiles. The permissions cannot be changed on the standard profiles. So the permissions are hard set, but but you can create custom profiles and then modify. You have complete control over the custom profiles. Okay. So that rule only applies to the standard profiles. These are, think of these as your out-of-the-box profiles. When you create a custom profile, you base it on a previous profile, and what it does is it then copies over the permissions and settings associated with whatever it's based on. Like I said, each profile is associated with a license type, and that limits access to certain objects and functionality based on the type of license that you purchased. So, organizations have one profile for each actor. Now, one of the limitations about profiles is, one, you can't associate a user with 2 profiles. You can't assign them 2 profiles. Nor can you do something where one profile inherits functionality from another profile. So there's no sort of pyramid structure to profiles. Each profile is independent of another profile. There doesn't currently exist some sort of functionality where you could say, take the permissions from this parent profile, and then that way I only have, if I want to remove a permission, I only have to do it in one location. If you want to remove a permission from 5 different profiles, you need to go into those 5 profiles and remove that specific permission. Okay? All right, so profiles and permissions. All right, so we have our 3 types of users, our 3 actors, and this is going to translate into creating 3 different profiles for our application. Okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to use object CRUD in order to limit the potential to do things within certain types of objects. They're administrative and general user. Like I said, administrative is more setup oriented versus general user has to do with the different types of objects and things that you can do. A few of the important permissions under administrative and what these do. There's view all data and modify all data. Now this is an instance within the profile in which you are granting sort of a universal level of data access to the users of this profile in order to, like I said, view all data or modify all data. Okay? So this is something that should not be given out regularly. So this is a couple of super user type permissions. In fact, it's not only modify all data, it's also really owner of all data, and you have owner level access. And when I come back to the issue of what's ownership and sharing, we'll talk about what that means. Okay. Customized application. This is really the ability to go into the setup menu and to create things, to create a new workflow rule and activate it and all that kind of stuff. So to customize your application definition. API only user. What this is referring to, there's API enabled and API only user. In other words, if you're logging in to the using this user account to log in to the web services API, then is it possible, or is this account only for API access? In other words, when the user goes into the web browser to log in, they will fail if they're an API only user. Okay. And then associated with API only user and API access would be password never expires. So this, you don't want your web service client to break one night just because it's being prompted to change its password. Something you probably want to enable for any of those machine users. Okay? Yeah. Sure.
Is in the during the scripting of the customization or in an expression wise, is there a way to distinguish an API user and a regular user so that you give permissions to API but don't give permissions to the user, real users?
Well, what I would do is create a separate profile for that API user, and then whatever it is you need set up specifically for that API user, then you could take a user account. Now, the drawback to all of this is this costs a monthly fee, but you would create a user account for the purpose of integration, configure that user's profile however you need to, and you could then also apply record level access to that specific user in the conditions, according to the conditions that you need. So that's the advantage of using a dedicated user account for the purpose of integration, is that then you have full control over what that user account can do, as opposed to using an existing user, in which case you're dependent upon that user's permissions.
So best practice will be to create a user,
Yeah.
separate user for API.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I guess it's what you're comfortable with from a security standpoint, because you could use something like a default sysadmin user, but then, do you want that password stored on the server or something? Whatever you're most comfortable with. Yeah.
Usually in our system, we usually use this differentiation to get over the validations. So users should have validations, for example, but the interface shouldn't have this.
Yeah. Murat, okay, so you bring up a great issue, which is, let's say that I am performing integration. I want to, I don't want to execute my validation rules. So I'm assuming that my data is clean when I push it into Salesforce or something like that. There's a couple of ways you can go about that. Remember that we had the global variables. For a particular user, we could access, maybe we create that single profile, or we access that user's account, and we go, okay, if this is integration user, then do not execute the validation rule. In other words, create within our validation rule, always have a logical and condition, which is to say, if this user is not an integration user and this criteria is met, then prevent the write to the database. As long as the user is an integration user, then in other words, we would never meet the criteria then. You could also do that along the lines of, so that's a user-based flag that's being set. You could also set a flag on the data that's being integrated. So you could create an extra field that is a checkbox that you could say, bypass validation rule. And that way, on a record-by-record basis, you could decorate your records that are being input into the system. This is something that would obviously never be displayed on a page layout for an end user, This field would never, appear there, but you would have access to it as an integration developer to decorate your data to apply that logic. At the end of the day, though, you have to write that logic in your validation rule yourself. There's not kind of a skip validation rule flag in general. So, okay. All right. Okay. Object permissions. When it says lacking the read permission for an object, if you don't have the read, then you don't have permission to really do anything. So read is the fundamental permission associated with any object. So whatever you're trying to do, if you don't have read, you'll just never see it. You don't have the potential, in other words, to do anything with this. Yeah. There's a couple of options here. There's the basic access, and then there's data administration. And notice it says read, create, edit, and delete. So that's our object CRUD. And that's referring to the potential to perform those actions associated with records of that object type. Then there is data administration. And this is a new feature that I believe was introduced in spring '09, or it might have been winter '09. But what this is that you can apply modify all data and view all data on an object-by-object basis. So I showed you previously that there was view all data and modify all data. That was universal, all records. Here, you could apply it on a record-by-record basis, or a object-by-object basis. And so, once again, that means the user can edit and view all records of that object type. Okay? All right, so let me quickly go through our different profile settings, and then we'll jump into the lab exercise. So first off, your profiles are located down here under Manage Users, and then click on Profiles. Now we can create a new profile by clicking on the New button. Anytime we create a new profile, it's based on one of our existing profiles. So it automatically copies over all those settings. Okay. Or we could come out here, instead of creating a new one, we could come out and edit an existing one or view an existing one. Now this is a little bit weird because sometimes settings associated with a profile are changed here. Like for instance, you set up field level security by clicking on View. Other times these things are set by clicking on Edit. So you just kind of got to get used to knowing when to click on Edit and when to scroll down and then click on the link to edit that particular thing. Why that is, I'm not entirely sure, but so it just takes a little time to get used to that. So what I want to point out is, let me scroll down to our administrative permissions. Like I said, it's just a number of checkboxes. There's also dependencies. So all of these blue information buttons are referring to dependencies that exist between these different permissions. Okay. These are the administrative ones, and these are the general user permissions. So general user permissions, in this case, like I said, these are the ones oriented towards really mostly operating on different types of objects. Okay. To change one of these, simply check or uncheck the box. All right, then down here we have object CRUD for both our standard objects and our custom objects. Okay. We can click on the read, create, edit, or delete. There's also dependencies between these two. So for instance, you can't have edit access without having read access. So if you check edit, it automatically checks read. If you uncheck read, it automatically unchecks edit. Okay. But like I said, these first four, the basic access is the potential to do whatever it is for this object type. Data administration is granting the permission to do it on a universal basis. So, So you can do this, like I said, per object type for your standard objects, and then also your custom objects. Any questions about this? There's more to this, but then we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So there's a few other things like user interface and field level security. Yeah?
The view all
Uh-huh.
box,
Yeah.
isn't that just the same thing as the read checkbox? I don't understand.
Sure. Okay. So what's this? Okay. So I think this is this is a pretty confusing thing. So if I have, what's the difference between, here I have candidates. There's read access, and then there's view all. What's the difference? Read access on a candidate, when we're talking about the basic access, is I have the potential to read candidate records. Okay? Data administration, view all, says I can view all candidate records. Regardless of what people, whether they share it with me or not, whether they provide me record level access or not, I can view all candidate records. Okay?
So it's an ownership kind of thing.
Yeah. So this one is really utilized to prevent a user from doing something. So over here on the left-hand side, basic level of access, by unchecking the box, you are removing the potential for the user to do that with any record of that object type. Here, to me, this is more like granting, you're sort of, this is more, you're identifying the user can view all of these records or they can modify all of these records. But it's you know, this one, like I said, this one is the potential to do something. This one is granting the ability to do something, or it is granting whatever that is.
I think if
Okay.
you uncheck the read
Yeah.
checkbox, then the tab even will not be visible to those users, right?
Yeah, so there's dependencies here. So if you were saying if,
The tab of candidates will not even be shown.
oh yeah, yeah. So you got to have access to the, you got to have access to the object to be able to, yeah, to even, yeah, to even see these things. So yeah.
So basically, view all is I can see all the candidates regardless of ownership,
Uh-huh.
sharing, anything. You
Yeah.
can see the whole table.
Yeah.
Is that true?
This, yeah. These four are what you're capable of doing. These last two are what you're able to do.
That
So.
overrides field level security? Just
No, it's field level security still takes precedence over this. So let me test that out actually. Let me make sure on that one. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not 100%. You know, once again, it's an object level, but it's a record level, and really, you know, the field level. Get a pen here. The field level, you know, is more, I don't know, more takes precedence. So let me check on that though. Okay. So let's say I have 5 candidate records. Okay. But nobody actually, I'm not the owner of any of those records, and nobody has shared them with me. Okay? Nobody has granted me record level access. It doesn't matter what my object cred is. Right now, I'm just potential. Okay? I'm all potential, but nobody's actually shared them with me, so I can't see any candidate records. Now, if I had view all, regardless of whether they share those records with me, I can view all of them. Okay? Okay, so let's jump into exercise. So we're going to do exercise 2-1 and 2-2. Okay. We're going to create some profiles. Okay. All right. for our hiring managers, our interviewers, and our recruiters. So, I wanted to follow up on a couple of questions that people asked. Does field level security take precedence over that modify all and the view all? What I did was I ran a quick test, and the test was to enable field level security for a specific user who now doing my other test to lock them out of login hours I can't log in as them. But anyways, what happened before 10 o'clock was that the user, I locked, or I said that a field, using field level security, I said that a field was read only. And then I granted that user modify all data associated with that object type in the profile. Then what I did was I logged in and tried to edit a record to see what happened. And what happened was the read only of the field level security took precedence over the modify all data associated with that object type. So when I edited the record, that field was not editable. Okay? So not only does field level security take precedence over the basic object CRUD, it also takes precedence over modify all data and those things for when the user is, when the user has been granted access that way.
The universal one is still a universal one, right? The universal modify all and the universal view all. Is that also overridden by the field level?
Well, that's exactly what that's exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm not talking about the object level. I'm talking about the user level, view all and.
Oh, the permission modify all data. Yeah. I could test. I mean, I can test that one out too. I'm going to assume that it's the exact same, but I can test that one out. So
there's no universal overriding anywhere.
There is. Oh, okay. You mean that permission? No, there's not a. I'll test it out and let's find out what happens. I assume it's going to behave exactly the same, but that is the greatest level of super userness that you can grant. So if you, if you don't want that to happen, I would just make sure you don't. I'd go make sure you don't turn on field level security for that profile. But I'll test that out, and then we'll see what happens. So. But no, essentially field level security applies always. So
is that only real super user system admin that can you lock the system admin out of seeing fields?
Yeah. So assuming that modify all data, the profile level permission behaves the same as modify all data, the object level setting. You know what I'm talking about? So, so if we take a look here, so even if I do system, I did system admin light, little custom one I created. So, so what I just tested was if I have modify all data here, or actually I can show you the one I actually tested. It wasn't a sysadmin, but it was a custom profile. So if I have modify all data here, like I've enabled it, so on candidates, but if I go down here to my field level security associated with candidates, what I did was I said the street address is, and this checkbox here is for read only. So the street address is read only. And when I logged in as a user, it was not editable. It was read only. I'll test out then there's the profile level modify all. So the profile based or profile level modify all is, where's M? Where is it? Modify, there, thank you. All right, modify, so I assume it behaves the same, but I'll test this one out. But that's a different setting than modify all records of that object type. So, okay.
I think I was not talking about the profile level field security. I was talking about the field security of the object. And I mean, during the design phase, not in the profile.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, if you want to have a super admin, you wouldn't go and check read only here in this profile.
Yeah.
But what I'm asking is, if you have this security in the field level in the object, not in the profiles tab, but in the during the design phase, while you are creating the field, you
Mm-hmm.
say that it's read only or something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Well,
modify all override this or not? That's
so when you're creating object fields, you know, when you're defining the object and you go to that second screen really, which is the one that says, do you want to apply field level security for these profiles? That is what we were talking about here. So it's going out to the same place, in other words, in order to apply field level security. It's just doing it as a part of that wizard. So it's the same setting. There's not a separate field level security associated with the object.
There was a read only, I think, just a tick.
Yeah. So when you create, so what you're referring to is when you create, if I go out here to my object and I create a new field, and let me do this as quickly as I can. So, all right. So, you know, there's things like required, unique, duplicates, but this thing here where it says read-only and visible, well, this is profile-based field level security that you're setting up here. It's not any different. Yeah, okay. So, all right. So let's continue with talking about field level security and actually work on our data. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to lock down some access to some particular data associated with our candidates. So maybe some demographic data. Oh, by the way, login hours. So I tested out the login hours with one of the users, and what happened was I set it up so that the user could only access data from between 9 and 10 a.m. or log in. The login hours were between 9 and 10 a.m. And then at 10:02, I clicked on a record. So I remained logged in, but the next time I attempted to do something, it says it logged me off. So it's interesting because the docs, I looked at the docs and it said, it basically described it as being checked at login time, which I'm sure it is checked at login time, but it's also checked at access time. So when you're accessing the data, it will check to see if you're within the login hours. So the next thing that you do, it will prevent you from doing that. And then finally, there was no sort of warning, or it just suddenly it didn't work. So all right.
I have one more question regarding the exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I log in as who's this guy? The last one, the great Kingman, and I'm expecting to see some tabs which I couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
So what dictates the?
Well, Lyra, we're going to talk about that, customizing the user interface via profiles in the next topic. So, okay. So the question was about tabs and what we see in the tabs when we log in as a different user, and we'll talk about that right here. So, all right. So we have a bunch of requirements associated with our access to data on our objects. Now, in this case, the requirements are specific fields on the objects, not access to the object as a whole. Okay. So in our case, we have some requirements around candidate information. So if you apply for a job, you probably fill out an application which in the United States contains your Social Security number. Well, in the United States, your Social Security number is a sensitive piece of information because it's one of the things that you use as almost a key to identify yourself when you're applying for a credit card or something like that. So we do not want to expose things like Social Security numbers to all of our users. That would be an example of something where we apply field level security so that only HR or the appropriate users actually see that sensitive data. Okay. So field level security, it's two things, view and edit. So not only does it, is it view, but also the ability to modify certain fields. Okay. It overrides, as we saw, it overrides pretty much everything. So field level security is trumps everything. It applies in many different situations. So if you're accessing data via the Web Services API, if you're accessing it in a report, if you're accessing it in a page layout, obviously, if you're accessing it because you see it in a related list or something like that. So it applies universally in terms of where you are within the tool for operating on that. Now, there is one exception to this, which is when you're automating stuff, whether it's with a workflow rule or Apex code, you can run, workflow rules run at a system level, and so does Apex. And so if you write the code to modify that field, for instance, then your code will modify it. But even if the user does not have the ability in field level access to edit that value. So once again, I go back to that example of like the bank account. I can't log into my checking account online and just edit the account balance field. Now that being said, that doesn't mean I have zero control over my account balance. If I want it to increase, I have to deposit a check. That fires off some code within my bank, which then increases my balance. Same thing for doing a withdrawal or whatever. But you can think of that example as being, I don't have field level access to my, or at least modify access to my checking account balance. But I can still change it because I first need to do things. Well, the same sort of logic applies to Force.com applications. All right, so let's see here. We got 2-3 and 2-4. We're going to set up some field level security. So why don't we jump into that right now and work on those labs, and then we will we'll continue along. So let's work on lab 2-3. What you're going to do is you're going to protect some information on the position in terms of making min and max pay associated with a position not viewable to certain people. And then first and last name are the only fields that the users can view associated with a candidate. So we're going to protect some of that other information associated with our candidates. Okay? So 2-3 and 2-4. All right?
For more information on Salesforce.com training and certification, please visit www.salesforce.com/training.